You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that most men don't lose power because of what they do, but because of what they answer? What if I told you that a single, careless response to a seemingly innocent question can quietly dismantle your confidence, your frame, and the way a woman sees you, without her ever saying a word? You've been there. A question lands casually. You answer honestly. Instantly, the energy shifts. Respect fades. Attraction cools. And you can't explain why, only that something was lost in that moment. This isn't about manipulation. It's about self-command. The Stoics understood this long before modern dating ever existed. Not every question deserves access to your inner world. In this video, you'll learn which questions subtly strip a man of his power, why answering them impulsively weakens your position, and how silence, composure, and restraint create natural authority. These are not tricks. They are principles of self-mastery. Watch this video till the very end, because the final insight ties everything together. And once you see it, you'll never respond the same way again. Number 1, why don't you ever get jealous? It sounds harmless on the surface, almost flattering, but it's one of those questions that quietly tests your internal balance. Not your words, not your explanations, your center. The moment you rush to explain yourself, defend your emotional state, or prove that you care enough, you've already stepped off solid ground. Wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Jealousy lives in the opposite direction. It's attention given to what you don't control. And the Stoics were clear. The more you invest your emotional energy in external validation, the weaker your inner authority becomes. The real danger of that question isn't jealousy itself. It's the temptation to perform emotion instead of embodying self-mastery. When you start explaining why you're not jealous, you subtly imply that jealousy would be the correct or expected response. That's where power leaks out. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach emotional suppression. It teaches emotional sovereignty. Epictetus reminded us, if anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, he was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone. That attitude isn't indifference. It's confidence rooted in self-knowledge. The same applies here. A calm lack of jealousy signals that your sense of worth isn't negotiated through external behavior. Jealousy often disguises itself as care, but Stoicism exposes it as fear. Fear of loss, fear of comparison, fear of inadequacy. When you explain why you don't feel jealous, you're pulled into defending yourself against an unspoken accusation. If you're not jealous, do you even care? That's a trap. Care and insecurity are not the same thing. The Stoics understood that attachment to outcomes is the source of inner disturbance. Warned, do not allow your mind to be enslaved by passions. Jealousy is one of those passions that feels justified, but quietly erodes your composure. Your power comes from not needing to prove emotional reactions. When you're grounded, your calm speaks louder than any explanation. Silence, or a brief, centered response, preserves your frame. The moment you start rationalizing your emotional discipline, you turn strength into something that needs approval. Stoic calm is not passive. It's active restraint. It's choosing not to hand over your emotional steering wheel to someone else's curiosity or insecurity. This is where action matters. You don't build this kind of composure by memorizing lines or rehearsing clever replies. You build it by training your inner posture. One practical exercise is negative visualization, a core Stoic practice. Spend time contemplating loss, not to scare yourself, but to remind yourself that nothing external defines you. When you've already accepted impermanence internally, jealousy loses its grip. You stop reacting because you're not clinging. Another practice is attention discipline. Notice where your mind goes when you feel the urge to explain yourself. That urge usually comes from wanting to be understood or validated. Gently interrupt it. Ask yourself, is my peace dependent on this being clarified? Constantly return to this internal check. Over time, you'll feel less compelled to justify your emotional state. You'll trust it instead. Stoicism also teaches you to separate signal from noise. That question often isn't about jealousy at all. It's about probing your emotional boundaries. When you respond calmly without overinvestment, you signal that your boundaries are intact. Seneca wrote, "He is most powerful who has himself in his own power." That power isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply refuses to be shaken. You should also train voluntary restraint. Not everything needs a response. Not every curiosity deserves access to your inner world. Practice withholding explanations even when you could easily give them. This isn't secrecy, it's selectivity. Over time, you'll notice a shift. Your presence becomes heavier, more grounded. People feel it. You don't chase emotional reactions, and that restraint amplifies respect. There's also a deeper habit you must adopt. Stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional depth. Jealousy is intense, but it's shallow. It spikes quickly and fades just as fast, leaving insecurity behind. Depth comes from steadiness, from knowing who you are regardless of external stimuli. When you embody that steadiness, questions like this lose their power because they can't hook into anything unstable. Another Stoic exercise that helps here is evening reflection. At the end of the day, review moments where you felt the urge to explain, defend, or perform emotion. Ask yourself why, not with judgment but with curiosity. Seneca recommended this daily audit as a way to strengthen character. Awareness sharpens restraint. Restraint builds authority. The goal isn't to appear unbothered, it's to genuinely be unshaken. That difference matters. One is an act, the other is a state. When you live from that state, your responses become minimal, grounded, and unforced. You don't deny emotions, you simply don't let them run the show. That's Stoic power. Remember this, the less you explain your emotional discipline, the more credible it becomes. When your calm doesn't need justification, it stands on its own. Lived among chaos and pressure, yet constantly reminded himself to return inward. You can do the same. Each time you resist the urge to over-explain, you reinforce your center. Each time you choose composure over performance, you grow stronger. Take action now. Decide that your emotional state does not require external approval. Practice stillness. Practice silence. Practice letting your presence do the talking. Over time, questions like, "Why don't you ever get jealous?" will stop feeling like tests, because you'll no longer feel tested. You'll simply be grounded, and that groundedness is where your power lives. Number 2, what's your biggest insecurity? When you're asked, what's your biggest insecurity, it can sound harmless on the surface, even intimate, even caring. But if you're not grounded, that question quietly shifts the balance of power inside you. Not because vulnerability is weakness. Stoicism never taught that. But because unexamined disclosure turns self-knowledge into self-exposure. Warned himself, do not give your mind to things that are not your own. Your inner struggles, your unfinished work, your private battles, these are not public property. When you hand them over impulsively, you're not being authentic. You're being unguarded, and there's a difference. Your insecurities are not conversation pieces. They are signals pointing to areas that require discipline, patience, and self-command. When you speak them casually, especially before you've mastered them, you frame yourself as someone still negotiating with his own foundation. The Stoics believed that power begins internally. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Notice the order. Identity first. Action second. Not confession first. Not self-analysis on demand. When you answer that question reflexively, you reverse the order. You let someone else lead you into defining yourself by what you lack instead of what you are building. This isn't about hiding or pretending, it's about timing and intention. A man who is focused doesn't rush to reveal unfinished parts of himself. He understands that insecurity, when named without mastery, becomes an anchor. Your words shape perception, yours and others. When you label yourself by a weakness, you reinforce it. You rehearse it, you give it weight. Seneca cautioned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Speaking insecurities aloud without purpose feeds imagination. It magnifies what should be minimized through action. There's also something deeper happening when that question lands. It pulls your attention inward in the wrong way. Instead of standing steady, you start scanning yourself for flaws. You begin to explain, justify, soften. That shift alone costs you presence. Stoicism is about composure, about being anchored. Wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." When your thoughts turn into public confessions too easily, your internal posture changes. You become reactive instead of deliberate. A man with inner strength doesn't deny imperfection. He simply refuses to center his identity around it. He knows that insecurity is a private workshop, not a public stage. When asked that question, the real test isn't honesty, it's self-command. Do you feel compelled to answer everything asked of you? Or can you choose what deserves your energy? Power begins when you realize you don't owe access to your inner world to anyone who asks. This is where boundaries come in, not rigid walls, but calm filters. Epictetus was clear that freedom comes from knowing what is yours to control and what is not. Your inner struggles are yours to refine, not to outsource. When you protect that space, you protect your direction. You stop leaking energy. You stop negotiating your worth in conversation. And something subtle happens. You feel steadier, less exposed, more whole. Here's a habit to adopt. When a question pulls you towards self, pause internally before responding. Not to strategize, but to check alignment. Ask yourself, does answering this strengthen my character or weaken my frame? That pause is everything. It's the space where discipline lives. Trained himself to create that space again and again. You can do the same. Silence, when chosen, is not avoidance, it's command. Another exercise is reframing internally. Instead of cataloging insecurities in your mind, reframe them as areas under construction. You don't need to verbalize them. You need to work on them. Each day, pick one internal weakness and address it through action, not explanation. Stoicism is practical. It values progress over performance. Seneca reminded us that improvement happens quietly, long before it's visible. Let that be true for you. There's also strength in ambiguity. Not everything needs to be spelled out. When you resist the urge to overshare, you develop emotional restraint. That restraint doesn't make you distant, it makes you grounded. You remain present instead of self-conscious. You listen more. You speak with intention. You stop defining yourself by what you fear and start embodying what you value. Understand this clearly. Power is not about dominance or control over others. It's about coherence within yourself. When your words, actions, and inner standards align, you feel solid. Questions that once unsettled you lose their grip. You're no longer pulled off-center by curiosity disguised as concern. You remain calm. You remain steady. You remain you. Adopt this mindset moving forward. Your inner work is sacred. Treat it that way. Don't rush to expose what is still evolving. Don't let casual questions dictate your self-perception. As said, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Strict doesn't mean harsh. It means disciplined. It means choosing growth over disclosure, mastery over momentary relief. Take action today. Decide that your insecurities will be addressed through effort, not conversation. When the question arises, redirect your focus inward without handing yourself over. Build quietly, strengthen deliberately. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You'll feel less need to explain yourself, less need to justify. Your presence will speak first. And that presence, calm, grounded, self-directed, is where real power lives. Number 3, how many women have you been with? It's one of those questions that quietly tests your frame, your self-control, and your understanding of power. The moment you rush to answer it, explain it, justify it, or defend it, you've already stepped into a trap you didn't need to enter. Not because the question is immoral or forbidden, but because it pulls you away from something essential, your composure. Wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In the same spirit, the best response to a question that seeks leverage is not resistance or confession, but inner steadiness. Power is not found in disclosure. It's found in restraint. This question isn't really about numbers, it's about positioning. The moment you treat it like a test you must pass, you give it authority over you. You start calculating how you'll be perceived. Too high and you fear judgment. Too low and you fear dismissal, so you adjust, you tailor, you perform. And in doing so, you hand over your center. The Stoics were clear on this point. Once you allow external opinions to dictate your inner state, you've surrendered sovereignty. Epictetus warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish." That includes being content with not clarifying, not correcting, not presenting a polished image for approval. When you answer a question like this directly, you reduce yourself to a metric, a statistic, something measurable and therefore comparable. But your presence is not a ledger. Your value is not arithmetic. The Stoic path teaches you to anchor your worth internally, not outsource it to reactions. The calm refusal to play along is not avoidance, it's self-respect. Silence, redirection, or light detachment preserves your power far more than any carefully crafted answer ever could. There's also something deeper happening here. This question tries to pull you into the past. It asks you to define yourself by what has already happened, rather than who you are now. Repeatedly reminded himself to live in the present moment, to act according to current virtue rather than former events. When you tether your identity to history, you stop being grounded in intention. You become reactive. A composed man does not need to narrate his past to justify his present. Notice how quickly the mind wants to rush in and fill the silence. That impulse is the real issue. It's the need to explain yourself, to manage perception, to avoid discomfort. The Stoics saw this impulse as a form of slavery. Seneca wrote, "He is most powerful who has himself in his own power." Having yourself in your own power means you don't speak just to relieve tension. You don't disclose just to seem agreeable. You choose your words or your silence deliberately. This is where habit change begins. Not by memorizing clever responses, but by retraining your relationship with validation. Ask yourself honestly, why does this question feel like it needs an answer? What discomfort are you trying to escape by responding? The Stoic practice is to sit with that discomfort instead of eliminating it. Let it exist. Observe it. You'll find that it weakens when you stop feeding it. Power grows in that pause. A practical exercise you can adopt is intentional non-reaction. When a question makes you feel the urge to explain or impress, delay your response internally. Take a breath. Feel your posture. Remind yourself that you are not obligated to offer personal access on demand. This isn't about being cold or defensive. It's about being self-possessed. Over time, this pause becomes natural. You stop blurting. You start choosing. Another exercise is reframing identity. Write down how you define yourself when no one is watching. Not achievements, not experiences, qualities, principles, standards. The Stoics believed that virtue, not history, was the true measure of a person. When you internalize this, questions like this lose their grip. They no longer feel threatening because they're no longer relevant to how you see yourself. There's also strength in understanding that mystery is not weakness. In modern culture, constant disclosure is praised as honesty, but the Stoics knew better. They valued discretion, not secrecy rooted in fear, but reserve rooted in discipline. Spoke about keeping the ruling center of the mind protected. Not everyone needs access to your inner life. Not every question deserves a direct answer. Protecting your inner world is an act of self-respect. You don't need to justify your past. You don't need to decorate it or downplay it. You don't need to convert it into social currency. The moment you stop doing that, you reclaim something vital: calm authority. People sense when you're unbothered by how you're evaluated. That composure is felt before it's understood, and it cannot be faked. This doesn't mean you become evasive or dishonest. Stoicism is not about deception. It's about alignment. If a question does not serve truth, growth, or mutual respect, you are free to disengage from it internally. Epictetus reminded his students that not every impression deserves assent. A question is an impression. You decide whether to accept it. Take action here. The next time you feel the pull to define yourself through disclosure, resist the urge. Practice holding your ground without explanation, not aggressively, calmly. Let silence do its work. Let presence speak. Over time, you'll notice something shift. You'll feel less reactive, more centered, less eager to be understood, more comfortable simply being. Power isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It doesn't overshare. It stays rooted. When you stop answering questions that pull you out of alignment, you don't lose connection. You gain control over yourself. And as the Stoics taught again and again, that is the only form of power that truly lasts. Number 4, where is this relationship going? The question, where is this relationship going, sounds harmless on the surface, even reasonable. But beneath it sits a subtle pressure that, if you answer it the wrong way, drains your power almost instantly. Not because commitment is wrong, not because clarity is bad, but because this question often isn't about direction. It's about control, reassurance, and extracting certainty from a moment that is meant to unfold naturally. The Stoics understood this deeply. Wrote, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." When you rush to define the future just to ease discomfort in the present, you abandon that weapon of reason. When you answer this question prematurely, you place yourself in a defensive position. You start explaining, justifying, projecting timelines. You shift from grounded presence into negotiation mode. And power is lost the moment you feel compelled to convince instead of simply being. Stoicism teaches you to stay anchored in what is yours to command, your actions, your values, your direction, not to surrender that authority to external pressure. The question pushes you to make promises about an uncertain future instead of standing firmly in the present moment. And the present is where your strength lives. There's also something deeper happening internally when this question hits you. It tempts you to abandon your inner rhythm. You start thinking in terms of outcomes instead of alignment. Epictetus warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In this context, it means being comfortable not rushing to define things just to appear reassuring. Silence or calm ambiguity isn't weakness, it's composure. When you answer from calm certainty rather than anxious clarity, your presence remains intact. You must understand this clearly. Power is not found in having all the answers. It's found in being centered even when answers are unnecessary. When you feel the urge to lock the future into words, pause. Ask yourself whether you're responding from strength or from fear of losing something. The Stoics constantly returned to this internal check, reminded himself to act without attachment to praise or approval. The moment you answer this question to soothe someone else's anxiety at the expense of your own groundedness, you've traded inner authority for short-term relief. This doesn't mean you avoid intention or direction in your life. Quite the opposite. A man with direction doesn't need to announce it. It's felt. When you are focused, disciplined, and steadily moving forward, the direction is evident without explanation. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Mastery here means not being dragged into conversations that force you to betray your pace. You don't rush the future because you're too busy building yourself in the present. The real danger of answering, "Where is this relationship going?" lies in how it pulls you out of the moment and into a hypothetical future that doesn't yet exist. Stoicism is brutally honest about this trap. Worrying about outcomes you cannot control weakens the mind. When you anchor yourself in the now, how you show up, how you act, how you maintain your standards, you retain your power. You let the future emerge as a consequence of consistency, not as a verbal contract. Here's a mental exercise you can adopt immediately. When you feel pressure to define the future, redirect your focus inward. Ask yourself, am I acting in accordance with my values today? That question matters more than any timeline. If the answer is yes, you are on the right path. If the answer is no, no amount of verbal reassurance will fix it. The Stoics believed that character precedes outcome. Live correctly, and direction reveals itself. Another practice is controlled speech. Often reminded himself to speak only what was necessary. Not everything that can be said should be said, especially when words are used to secure approval. Train yourself to respond without over-explaining. Over-explanation is often a symptom of inner instability. Calm brevity, on the other hand, signals confidence. You don't owe the future an announcement. You owe the present your full presence. There's also a discipline of emotional neutrality here. When you detach your sense of worth from how the question is received, you stay grounded. Epictetus taught that disturbance doesn't come from events, but from judgments about events. This question only has power over you if you judge it as a threat. See it instead as a test of composure. Can you remain centered? Can you resist the pull to rush certainty? Each time you do, your inner strength grows. You should also practice future detachment, not because you lack ambition, but because you refuse to be ruled by anticipation. The Stoics trained themselves to hold plans lightly. They acted with intention but accepted uncertainty. You can do the same. Commit fully to your path, not to predictions. Focus on becoming solid, disciplined, and self-directed. When you live this way, your power doesn't fluctuate based on questions or expectations. Take a moment each day for reflection. Ask yourself where you've been pulled into conversations that made you abandon your calm center. Don't criticize yourself. Observe. Awareness is the first layer of mastery. Over time, you'll notice a shift. You'll stop feeling rushed. You'll stop needing to define things prematurely. Your presence will become steadier, and steadiness is magnetic. Wrote, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved and the raging of the sea falls still around it." When you embody that energy, questions lose their ability to shake you. You don't resist them. You simply don't surrender your footing to them. That is Stoic power. Take action now. Commit to staying rooted in the present. Commit to building yourself daily without needing to narrate the future. Let your consistency speak. Let your calm do the talking. When you stop answering questions that demand certainty you don't owe, you reclaim your power, not by force but by discipline. And discipline, as the Stoics knew, is the foundation of true strength. Number 5, do you really like me, or are you just bored? It sounds harmless on the surface, almost playful, but beneath it sits a quiet trap that tests your frame, your self-command, and your sense of inner authority. The moment you rush to defend yourself, explain your intentions, or prove your sincerity, you give away something subtle but powerful: your composure. The Stoics understood this dynamic long before modern conversations ever named it. Wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In this context, that means not mirroring insecurity with reassurance seeking, not answering emotional pressure with emotional surrender. Your power lives in steadiness, not in justification. This question pulls at a primitive urge inside you, the need to be understood, chosen, validated. If you're not aware of it, you'll respond from impulse rather than intention. You'll try to sound convincing instead of grounded. And the irony is that the more you try to prove your interest, the less solid you appear. Stoicism teaches you to pause before reacting, to ask yourself whether a response is necessary at all. Epictetus was clear. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. The real work isn't about crafting the perfect answer. It's about mastering the impulse to explain yourself. When you answer a question like this directly, especially with emotional urgency, you step into a defensive posture. You implicitly accept the frame that your intentions are questionable and need clarification. That's where power drains. A man rooted in himself doesn't scramble to correct assumptions. He doesn't chase certainty in someone else's mind. He remains calm, present, and unshaken. This isn't coldness, it's self-respect. Reminded himself daily not to hand over his inner state to external voices. That discipline applies here more than ever. You need to understand something crucial. Not every question is an invitation to reveal more of yourself. Some questions are tests of alignment. They ask, without saying it directly, whether you are centered or needy, whether your sense of worth is internal or dependent. When you answer from a place of anxiety, you communicate uncertainty. When you don't rush to answer, when you stay relaxed and grounded, you communicate confidence without words. Seneca put it plainly, "He who has peace of mind disturbs neither himself nor another." Your calm is the message. This doesn't mean you become silent or evasive out of fear. It means you respond if you choose to respond from strength rather than pressure. The Stoics valued intentional speech. Advise speaking only what is necessary and beneficial. Ask yourself in that moment, does answering this question increase clarity or does it feed insecurity? Does it reflect who you are or does it pull you away from yourself? The answer to that determines whether you speak or simply remain composed. There's also a deeper layer here. This question tries to collapse time. It demands certainty now. It pushes you to define feelings prematurely, to lock yourself into a narrative before you've decided anything internally. Stoicism resists that kind of urgency. The Stoic mind moves deliberately. It doesn't allow others to rush its inner processes. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you stop trying to control how you're perceived. When you don't feel compelled to clarify your intentions on demand, you reclaim that freedom. To build this habit, you need to train your emotional pause. One practical exercise is the Stoic delay. When you feel the urge to answer immediately, take a breath. Not externally, not theatrically, internally. Create space between stimulus and response. That space is where your power lives. In that pause, remind yourself, I don't need to convince anyone of who I am. That single thought can change your entire presence. Another practice is value anchoring. Before any interaction, quietly ground yourself in your principles. Ask yourself what kind of man you're committed to being: calm, deliberate, self-directed. When a question challenges you emotionally, return to that anchor. Constantly return to his own guiding values through repetition and reflection. You can do the same. When you're anchored, questions like this lose their ability to destabilize you. It's also important to detach from outcome. The moment your response is driven by the hope of being liked, chosen, or reassured, you've already stepped out of alignment. Stoicism teaches outcome independence. You control your actions, not others' interpretations. Seneca warned against emotional dependency on external approval because it creates inner slavery. When you release the need to control how you're seen, your responses become lighter, cleaner, more authentic. Notice how different it feels when you don't answer from fear. There's no tension in your body, no racing thoughts, no mental rehearsal. You're simply present. That presence is felt. It communicates confidence far more effectively than any explanation ever could. This is why Stoics emphasized being rather than persuading. Don't explain your philosophy, Epictetus said. Embody it. To strengthen this muscle, practice restraint in low-stakes moments. Resist the urge to over-explain in everyday conversations. Let silence do some of the work. Let ambiguity exist without rushing to resolve it. This isn't manipulation, it's emotional discipline. Over time, you'll notice something shift. You'll feel less reactive, less eager to justify yourself, more comfortable letting others sit with their own questions. A focused, grounded man doesn't fear misunderstanding. He trusts his consistency. He knows that clarity reveals itself over time through behavior, not through hurried words. Believe that character is proven by repeated action, not momentary declarations. When you internalize that, questions like this stop feeling threatening. They become noise. And as you've already learned, noise only has power when you give it attention. Take this seriously. The next time you feel that pull to explain yourself, pause. Choose composure over reassurance. Choose alignment over approval. Remind yourself that your power doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being rooted. That's Stoic strength. Calm, self-contained, unrushed. And once you operate from that place, you'll notice that fewer questions can shake you and fewer words are needed to hold your ground. Number 6, why don't you open up more? If you don't understand the weight behind this question, you will answer it in a way that quietly drains your power. Not because vulnerability is weakness, but because unfiltered emotional exposure without self-mastery is. The Stoics understood this distinction clearly. Wrote, "Do not give your mind to things that are not in your control." Your inner world is one of the few domains that truly belongs to you. When you hand it over impulsively, you don't create connection, you create imbalance. The pressure to open up often pushes you to confuse depth with disclosure. You're nudged to pour out emotions before you've even understood them yourself. That's not strength, that's leakage. Stoicism never taught emotional suppression, but it demanded emotional discipline. Epictetus was blunt about this. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. If you don't know who you are yet, if your emotions still run you instead of the other way around, opening up becomes a loss of frame. You don't gain closeness, you lose clarity. You don't need to narrate your inner storms to prove depth. Depth shows itself through steadiness, not confession. When you rush to explain your fears, doubts, or uncertainties in response to this question, you subtly position yourself as seeking understanding rather than embodying certainty. And certainty doesn't mean arrogance. It means emotional self-sufficiency. Constantly reminded himself to be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. The waves don't disappear. The rock just doesn't move. This question often tests whether you are grounded in yourself or dependent on external validation. If your instinct is to over-explain, to justify, to expose wounds prematurely, that's a signal for you, not for her. It tells you where your work is. Stoicism teaches that your emotions are information, not commands. You are meant to observe them, refine them, and then decide what deserves expression. Not everything needs a voice. Some things need mastery first. Opening up without structure turns emotions into currency. You start trading vulnerability for approval, honesty for reassurance. That's not connection, that's negotiation. Seneca warned against this internal chaos when he wrote, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When you verbalize unresolved emotions, you often amplify them. You relive them. You strengthen them. Silence, when chosen consciously, can be a form of strength and self-respect. This doesn't mean becoming closed, cold, or distant. It means being selective, intentional, calm. When you are centered, you don't feel the urge to spill your inner world to feel seen. You are already anchored. And paradoxically, that grounded presence invites more respect and curiosity than emotional flooding ever could. Stoic men didn't perform their emotions, they governed them. There's also a deeper layer here. This question can subtly push you into abandoning your masculine polarity by dragging you into excessive emotional explanation. Power doesn't vanish because you have feelings. It vanishes when feelings lead and principles follow. Didn't deny his inner struggles. He wrote them privately, refined them internally, and acted outwardly with discipline. That's the model. Inner honesty, outer composure. Here's a practical shift you need to make. Replace reactive disclosure with reflective restraint. When you feel the urge to open up immediately, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself whether what you're about to share is processed or raw. Stoicism demands that you digest your emotions before serving them. If you wouldn't act on an impulse, why would you speak from one? A powerful exercise is emotional journaling without an audience. Write freely. Say everything you're tempted to say out loud, then leave it. Return later and read it again. What still feels solid? What feels performative? This practice builds emotional literacy without surrendering your frame. Used writing as his private forge. You should too. Another exercise is delayed expression. When an emotion surfaces, give it time. Not to suppress it, but to understand it. Ask yourself where it comes from, what it wants, and whether expressing it serves your long-term character. Epictetus taught that freedom comes from responding deliberately rather than reacting emotionally. This is how you train that muscle. You also need to redefine what opening up actually means. It doesn't mean confessing weakness on demand. It means living transparently aligned with your values. Your consistency, your calm responses, your refusal to be emotionally hijacked. These speak louder than emotional monologues ever could. Stoic strength is quiet. It doesn't seek applause. It doesn't seek comfort. When you stop feeling pressured to open up, you gain something rare: emotional sovereignty. You choose when and how you reveal yourself. That choice alone restores power. You're no longer pulled into conversations that leave you exposed and uncertain. You remain centered, measured, present. And presence is attractive because it signals self-command. Take action now. Decide that your inner world is not public property. Decide that your emotions deserve respect, not exploitation. Commit to mastering them before expressing them. As said, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Guard those thoughts. Refine them. Let them shape you before you offer them to anyone else. You don't lose power by being silent. You lose power by being ungrounded. When you embody emotional discipline, you don't need to explain yourself. Your composure speaks. Your restraint commands respect. And that is the kind of strength that doesn't need to open up to be felt. Number 7, would you change for me? The question, would you change for me, sounds harmless on the surface, even caring, but beneath it sits a quiet test of your inner foundation. Not a test of affection, but of self-command. When you hear it, something subtle happens inside you. A pull, a pressure to reassure, to soften, to reshape yourself so the moment feels smooth. And this is where power either stays with you or slips away. Warned, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. This question isn't dangerous because of the words. It's dangerous because of how quickly it tempts you to abandon your center. The moment you rush to promise change, you're signaling something deeper than flexibility. You're saying your identity is negotiable under emotional pressure. And once that message is sent, it can't be unsent. Stoicism teaches that a man without a fixed inner compass is easy to move, easy to influence, easy to bend. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be invincible, make sure you never enter a contest where the outcome depends on others. When you agree to change yourself to meet someone else's expectations, you've entered exactly that contest. Your peace, your direction, your sense of self are now up for approval. This doesn't mean you become rigid or unresponsive. That's a misunderstanding many people fall into. Stoicism is not about stubbornness, it's about sovereignty. There's a difference between growth chosen freely and change offered as a concession. One comes from strength, the other comes from fear of loss. When you feel that urge to immediately reassure, Yes, I'll change, I'll be different, I'll adjust. Pause. Ask yourself what's driving it. Is it principle, or is it the discomfort of potential disapproval? A man who is grounded doesn't rush to answer this question because he doesn't see himself as unfinished or lacking. He understands that character is shaped by values, not by demands. Seneca wrote, "He who depends on himself is the greatest." Depending on yourself means you don't outsource your identity. You don't hand it over in exchange for acceptance. You don't reshape your spine just to keep emotional peace in the room. And paradoxically, that steadiness is what creates respect. There's also something else hidden in this question. It quietly frames you as a project, as someone who must be improved, corrected, refined according to someone else's vision. When you accept that frame, you shrink. Not immediately, not visibly, but internally. You begin to second-guess your instincts. You hesitate where you once acted naturally, and over time that hesitation erodes your presence. Cautioned himself, be content to appear what you are. That's not vanity, that's alignment. When who you are inside matches what you present outwardly, there's no friction, no quiet self-betrayal. Power in the Stoic sense is not dominance, it's self-possession. It's the ability to remain calm, clear, and unmoved when emotional leverage is applied. The question, would you change for me, is leverage. Not always consciously, not always malicious, but leverage nonetheless. And Stoicism trains you to recognize leverage without reacting impulsively. You don't need to argue. You don't need to justify. You don't need to harden your tone. You simply need to stay rooted. Here's a habit you need to adopt. Separate growth from approval. Growth is something you pursue because it aligns with your values. Approval is something you seek when you doubt those values. The Stoics were obsessed with this distinction. Epictetus reminded his students that if you chase admiration, you become a slave to the crowd. If you chase virtue, you become free. So when this question arises, internally shift your focus. Instead of asking how to answer it, ask whether the premise deserves acceptance at all. Another practical exercise is values clarification. Write down the traits, principles, and standards you refuse to compromise, not as a defensive act but as a grounding one. When pressure shows up, you won't scramble. You'll already know where you stand. Didn't improvise his ethics in the moment, he rehearsed them daily. That's why he remained composed in situations that would unbalance most people. You can do the same. Preparation breeds calm. You also need to practice delayed response. Not silence as avoidance, but silence as strength. When you don't rush to fill space, you retain control of it. The Stoics valued measured speech because it reflects measured thought. Seneca warned against quick emotional reactions, calling them the enemy of reason. The moment you slow down, the emotional weight of the question loses force. You see it clearly instead of feeling cornered by it. Understand this deeply. A man who is willing to abandon himself for acceptance eventually loses both. Respect fades when your boundaries blur. Attraction weakens when your identity becomes fluid. And most importantly, your self-respect erodes when you notice the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. Stoicism is ruthless about this because it prioritizes inner harmony over external comfort. Said, no man is free who is not master of himself. Mastery requires saying no, not loudly, not aggressively, but internally and decisively. This doesn't mean you reject reflection or improvement. Stoics believed in constant self-examination, but that examination was inward-facing, not outsourced. You choose change because it makes you more aligned with reason, not because it makes you more palatable. When change is self-directed, it strengthens you. When it's approval-driven, it weakens you. Learn to feel the difference in your body. One feels grounded, the other feels tense and urgent. Take action now. Practice standing firm internally, even if externally you remain calm and open. Notice when your mind reaches for reassurance. Interrupt it. Return to your principles. Remind yourself that your worth is not negotiated in conversation. A focused, self-directed man doesn't need to promise change on demand. He embodies consistency, and consistency is power. In the end, the real danger of this question isn't losing someone else. It's losing yourself quietly while thinking you're being accommodating. Stoicism teaches you to guard against that loss above all else. When you stay rooted, when you choose alignment over appeasement, you don't need to prove your power. It's felt. And once it's felt, it doesn't need words. Number 8, what are your weaknesses? When you're asked, what are your weaknesses? It sounds harmless on the surface, reasonable even. But if you answer it the wrong way, you quietly give away something essential: your frame, your grounding, your authority over how you're perceived. This isn't about hiding flaws or pretending to be flawless. The Stoics never advocated deception. What they warned against was surrendering your inner position. Wrote, be content to seem what you really are. Notice the wording. He didn't say explain what you are. He said be. There's a difference. Power is not lost by having weaknesses. It's lost when you rush to expose, justify, or dramatize them for approval. When you answer that question impulsively, you shift from presence to performance. You start narrating yourself instead of embodying yourself. You turn inward in a way that's not reflective but defensive. And in that moment, your energy changes. You're no longer steady. You're managing perception. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus reminded his students that if you want to be invincible, you must stop handing over your inner world to external judgment. When you list your weaknesses to someone who hasn't earned that level of access, you're outsourcing your self-definition. This question often tempts you to sound humble, to appear emotionally open. But humility isn't self-dissection, and openness isn't self-abandonment. Seneca warned against turning self-criticism into a public performance. He believed self-examination was sacred work, done in private for the sake of improvement, not validation. When you rush to name your flaws out loud, especially in early or unstable dynamics, you blur boundaries. And blurred boundaries are where respect quietly erodes. Here's the deeper issue. When you answer that question directly, you allow someone else to frame your identity around limitation. You shrink your presence to a list of defects. Even if your intentions are good, the effect is subtle but real. You move from centered to explainable, from grounded to accessible. A Stoic man doesn't fear his weaknesses, but he doesn't lead with them either. He leads with character, with consistency, with calm. Wrote, let others see your character in your actions, not your explanations. That line alone should change how you respond to questions that invite self. This doesn't mean dodging or deflecting in a nervous way. That's weakness too. The power move is composure. It's understanding that not every question deserves a full excavation of your inner landscape. Some questions are tests of frame, not requests for truth. The Stoics trained themselves to pause before responding, not to manipulate, but to remain aligned. When you slow down, you regain control. You stop reacting and start choosing. You need to internalize this. Your weaknesses are your responsibility, not your introduction. They are worked on in silence, through discipline and repetition, not through disclosure. Epictetus was blunt about this. He said that the philosopher does not announce his progress, he demonstrates it. If you are improving, that improvement speaks louder than any confession ever could. And if you're not improving, talking about your weaknesses won't save you anyway. A focused, grounded response comes from a different place entirely. It's not defensive. It's not eager. It's calm. You don't deny imperfection, but you don't spotlight it either. You stay upright in yourself. You remember that your value isn't negotiated through verbal transparency. It's revealed over time through behavior. That's Stoic power, quiet, unforced, immovable. There's an internal shift you must practice to handle questions like this correctly. Stop seeing them as moments where you must prove honesty. Instead, see them as moments where you must maintain alignment. Ask yourself internally, does answering this serve my character, or does it serve someone else's curiosity? That question alone will save you from countless self-inflicted losses of power. Here's a practical exercise you can start today. Write down your weaknesses privately. Be ruthless, be honest. Then next to each one, write the daily discipline you are practicing to improve it. This is Stoic work. This is strength. The exercise isn't about shame, it's about ownership. When you know you're actively working on yourself, you feel no urge to explain yourself to anyone. Your silence becomes confident instead of awkward. Another exercise is response discipline. Practice pausing before answering personal questions, not with tension, with ease. 1 breath. 2. Let the moment breathe. Constantly reminded himself not to be dragged by impulse. That pause keeps you in control. It signals self-respect. People feel it even if they can't articulate it. You must also train yourself to separate vulnerability from self-exposure. Vulnerability, in Stoic terms, is the courage to face yourself honestly and improve relentlessly. Self-exposure is often just insecurity wearing the mask of openness. When you confuse the two, you weaken your position. Seneca wrote, "He who seeks approval from others makes himself their servant." Don't become a servant to questions that quietly ask you to lower yourself. This is where your power truly lives, in restraint, in choosing not to hand over pieces of yourself prematurely, in knowing that depth is revealed through time, not talk. When you stop over-answering, you stop over-giving. And when you stop over-giving, you become harder to shake, harder to manipulate, harder to dismiss. Take action now. Decide that your self-work will be internal and disciplined, not conversational and performative. Decide that your weaknesses will be refined through action, not narrated for effect. Carry this reminder with you. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In this case, the injury is the quiet pressure to reduce yourself to a list of flaws. You don't need to be secretive. You need to be sovereign. When you stand firmly in who you are becoming, questions like this lose their power over you. And when that happens, you don't just keep your power, you deepen it. Number 9, are you afraid of losing me? Are you afraid of losing me? Sounds simple on the surface, almost innocent. But the moment you answer it from a place of fear, something subtle shifts inside you. Power doesn't vanish dramatically, it leaks. This question isn't really about reassurance. It's about position. And if you don't understand what's being tested, you'll answer in a way that quietly hands over your center. The Stoics warned constantly about this kind of internal surrender. Wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." The danger here isn't the question. It's the meaning you attach to it. When you answer from fear, you confirm that your emotional stability depends on someone else staying. That dependency is felt immediately, even if no one names it. You stop standing on your own ground. Your words may sound caring, but the energy behind them is shaky. Stoicism teaches you something radically different. Your value is not conditional. Your peace is not negotiable. Your strength comes from being whole on your own. When you forget this, you start bargaining with your identity, and respect erodes quietly. This question pulls you toward over-explaining, over-affirming, or shrinking yourself to be kept. And the Stoics would tell you plainly, anything that makes you smaller to be chosen is not strength. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." If the idea of loss controls your words, you are no longer master of yourself. You may think you're expressing care, but what you're really revealing is fear of absence. And fear is never attractive, never grounding, never stabilizing. Here's the shift you need to internalize. Being calm about loss does not mean you don't care. It means you are not ruled by outcomes. Stoicism isn't cold detachment, it's emotional sovereignty. Reminded himself daily that people come and go, circumstances change, and nothing external is guaranteed. When you truly accept that, you stop clinging. And when you stop clinging, your presence becomes steadier, calmer, heavier in the right way. The moment you answer that question by reassuring from insecurity, you subtly announce that your sense of self depends on being chosen. That's the real cost. You may not feel it immediately, but it shows up later as anxiety, overthinking, and the need for constant confirmation. Stoicism cuts that cycle at the root. It teaches you to stand firm regardless of outcomes. Not because outcomes don't matter, but because you matter more. You need to train yourself to separate attachment from fear. Attachment says, I choose. Fear says, I need. One is strength, the other is erosion. Seneca warned, he who depends on another for his happiness is fragile. When you answer from fear of loss, you reinforce fragility. When you answer or choose silence from inner steadiness, you reinforce strength. This is where discipline comes in. Not discipline over words, but discipline over your inner state. Before responding to emotionally loaded questions, pause internally. Ask yourself, am I speaking from alignment or from anxiety? That pause is everything. Stoicism is not about quick reactions, it's about measured responses. Constantly reminded himself to slow the mind before acting. You must do the same. There's a powerful mental exercise you can practice daily. Imagine your sense of worth as something entirely self-contained. No one can give it. No one can take it. Sit with that idea until it stops feeling theoretical and starts feeling real. When you internalize this, questions like this lose their power over you. They stop pulling emotional reactions out of you because there's nothing to hook into. Another practice is negative visualization, a core Stoic tool. Briefly contemplate loss, not to scare yourself, but to normalize impermanence. When your mind no longer treats loss as catastrophe, fear loosens its grip. You become calmer, less reactive, more grounded. And paradoxically, this calm is what creates emotional gravity. People feel it. They respond to it. You must also train yourself to speak less when emotions are charged. Silence, when rooted in confidence, is not avoidance, it's control. Epictetus taught that not every thought deserves expression. When you don't rush to fill space with reassurance, you communicate stability without saying a word. That stability is power. This question only destabilizes you if you let it define you. When your identity is anchored in your principles instead of someone else's presence, you move differently. You listen more. You react less. You don't need to prove your value through emotional exposure. You embody it through composure. Take action here. Start practicing emotional neutrality in moments of internal pressure. Not coldness, neutrality. Calm breathing, relaxed posture, minimal words. Let your internal state lead, not the need to secure an outcome. Over time, this rewires you. You stop chasing reassurance and start radiating certainty. Wrote, be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved. That's the goal. Not dominance. Not control over others. Control over yourself. When you are unmoved by fear of loss, questions like this lose their ability to tilt you. And when nothing can tilt you, your presence becomes unmistakably strong. You don't need to fear losing anyone. You need to fear losing yourself. Choose inner stability over emotional bargaining. Choose calm over reassurance seeking. Choose self-mastery over fear. That is Stoic power. And once you live from that place, no question can strip it from you. Number 10, what would you do if I left? It's one of those questions that quietly tests the foundation of your inner strength. It doesn't just ask about the future, it probes your sense of self. And if you answer it from fear, attachment, or the need to reassure, you give away something essential, your center. The Stoics understood this dynamic deeply. Wrote, do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. What he's pointing to is self-sufficiency of character. A man who is anchored in himself does not negotiate his worth based on who stays or who leaves. When you're asked that question, the real danger isn't the words you choose, it's the mindset you reveal. If your answer tries to convince, plead, explain, or promise, you communicate dependency without ever saying it directly. You imply that your stability rests on another person's decision. And power, in Stoic terms, is never about control over others. It's about command over yourself. Epictetus was blunt about this. If you want to be invincible, make sure that no one can make you miserable by their choices. The moment your answer reveals that someone else's departure would collapse you, you've surrendered that invincibility. This question often tempts you to perform reassurance instead of standing in truth. You might feel the urge to prove devotion, to paint a picture of devastation, to show how irreplaceable the other person is. But devotion that erases your own footing is not strength, it's emotional surrender. Stoicism teaches you to love without clinging, to value without depending. When you internalize this, your energy changes. You stop answering from anxiety and start responding from clarity. The deeper issue is this. The question tries to pull your focus outward. It wants you to imagine loss, panic, and reaction. A Stoic response doesn't deny emotion, but it doesn't obey it either. Reminded himself constantly to return to what is within his control. You cannot control another person's choice to stay or leave. You can control your conduct, your dignity, your direction. When your answer reflects that understanding, it carries weight without aggression and calm without coldness. If you're honest with yourself, this question exposes how attached you are to outcomes. And attachment to outcomes is where power leaks. Seneca warned, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." When you mentally rehearse abandonment, you suffer in advance, and then you broadcast that suffering through your response. The Stoic path asks you to release imagined futures and stay rooted in the present. Right now, you are here. Right now, you are whole. Any answer that forgets that truth weakens you. The habit you need to build is internal grounding. Before responding to emotionally loaded questions, pause. Not to calculate a clever reply, but to check your internal posture. Are you standing on fear or on self-respect? Are you trying to secure something, or are you simply expressing who you are? The pause itself is powerful. It interrupts reactivity. It allows reason to lead instead of impulse. Epictetus called this the discipline of assent, choosing which thoughts you allow to guide you. A practical exercise you can start today is mental detachment training. Sit quietly and reflect on the idea that nothing external is guaranteed. Not to become cynical, but to become stable. Repeat to yourself what the Stoics repeated: "I have what I need within me." This isn't arrogance, it's preparation. When you no longer fear loss, you stop negotiating from weakness. Your words become fewer, calmer, and more grounded. Another exercise is identity reinforcement. Write down who you are independent of anyone else's presence. Not roles, not labels, principles. Values, standards you live by whether someone stays or goes. Grounded himself in this daily. When you know who you are, questions like, "What would you do if I left?" lose their emotional charge. They no longer threaten your foundation because your foundation is internal. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or emotionally distant. Stoicism is often misunderstood that way. The Stoics cared deeply, but they refused to collapse. They loved without losing sovereignty. When your answer comes from that place, it doesn't need drama or defensiveness. It carries quiet confidence, and quiet confidence is felt instantly. You should also train yourself to stop explaining your resilience. Strength doesn't require a speech. Seneca wrote, "The greatest power is to be calm." Calm responses unsettle expectations because they don't feed emotional games. When you don't rush to reassure or dramatize, you change the dynamic entirely. You communicate that your life has direction, momentum, and meaning beyond any single relationship. Take action now by practicing emotional neutrality in hypothetical scenarios. When your mind jumps to imagined losses, gently bring it back. Remind yourself, if it happens, I will respond with dignity. That's it. No rehearsing pain. This mental discipline builds emotional endurance. And emotional endurance is what prevents power from being stripped away in moments of testing. The truth is simple, even if it's uncomfortable. A man who knows he will be fine regardless of who leaves is a man who is chosen freely, not clung to. But that cannot be your motive. Stoicism is not a strategy to manipulate outcomes. It's a way to align with reality. People come and go. Character remains. Lived with that awareness daily, surrounded by instability, betrayal, and loss. Yet his writings are calm, steady, unshaken. So the next time you face that question, don't rush to answer it outwardly. Answer it inwardly first. Ask yourself, am I rooted or am I reaching? Build the habit of rooting yourself in purpose, discipline, and self-command. When you do, your presence changes. Your words change, and your power stays exactly where it belongs, with you. Focus on becoming so internally aligned that no question can pull you off balance. That is Stoic strength. That is masculine composure. And that is how you stop giving away power without ever raising your voice. Before you leave, remember this. Your power is not in how much you explain yourself, but in how firmly you choose what deserves a response. The moment you feel the urge to over-justify, to rush for approval, or to defend your worth, pause. That pause is strength. That pause is self-mastery. A man who controls his reactions controls the frame. He doesn't get pulled into tests, traps, or emotional negotiations. He remains centered, calm, and unshaken, because he knows his value doesn't need to be argued, proven, or validated. As reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Carry these principles with you. Practice restraint. Practice silence when silence is power. Practice walking away from conversations that demand you shrink yourself just to be accepted. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Rewatch this video. Reflect on it. Apply it. And if you want to continue building unshakable inner authority, presence, and respect, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because the strongest men are not the loudest ones, they are the most controlled. Watch closely, move deliberately, and never give your power away.